Tund had dreamed of this day for weeks. In the quiet nights of his service, he thought about the warm smile of his mother. Yeah. She was the one who had raised him with strength and patience after his father had passed away. She wrote him letters filled with encouragement, reminding him that home would always be waiting. Now, as he stood at the gate of their house, his heart raced with excitement. He carried a small bag on his shoulder, and in his other hand, he held a gift he had carefully chosen for her. It was not expensive, but it was something from his heart. The sun was beginning to set, and golden light touched the roof of the family home. Tund paused for a moment, breathing in the familiar scent of the earth, the trees, and the dust of his hometown. He whispered to himself, "Finally, I am home." A smile spread across his face, but as he stepped closer to the door, that smile began to fade. The air around the house did not feel peaceful. Instead of silence or laughter, he heard sharp voices, heavy with tension. At first, he thought perhaps neighbors were arguing outside, but the sound was coming from within his own home. His steps slowed. The tone of the voices was troubling. One was his mother's, filled with fear and resistance. The other voice was deeper, rough, and angry. It belonged to someone he did not recognize at once. Tund froze by the doorway, his ears straining to catch every word. He heard his mother saying, "Leave me alone, I told you I don't want this." Her voice cracked with desperation. The man's reply was harsh, "Don't pretend you're too proud. Nobody is here to protect you now." Tund's heart began to pound. His chest tightened, and a wave of confusion rushed through him. Why was a strange man inside their home, raising his voice at his mother? He set down his bag quietly, his soldier's instincts sharpening. Every lesson he had learned in the army came flooding back: control, patience, and awareness. But this was not a battlefield far from home. This was his mother's house, and someone was threatening her. He took a step closer, careful not to make noise, and peered through the narrow space of the doorway. What he saw made his blood run hot. Ya stood near the corner of the room, her hands raised in defense. Her eyes were wide, and her body trembled. In front of her was Cato, the handyman who sometimes came to fix broken pipes and wooden doors in the neighborhood. But this was not the helpful worker Tund remembered. This man's face was twisted with anger, and his posture was menacing. Ya tried to move away, but Cato blocked her path. "You should be grateful I even come here," he said, his voice dripping with arrogance. Tund clenched his fists so hard his knuckles turned white. Every muscle in his body screamed to rush in, but he held himself back for a moment. He needed to see clearly, to understand what was happening. The gift in his hand slipped to the ground without him noticing. His focus was locked only on his mother. He could see the way her lips trembled as she tried to stand strong, and the way Cato stepped closer with no respect, no kindness. It was a picture Tund would never forget, a moment that turned the joy of homecoming into a storm of anger. His mind raced. In one instant he felt the boy who longed for his mother's embrace, and in the next he was the soldier ready to act. The reunion he imagined was gone. Instead he had walked into a scene that tore his heart apart. He whispered under his breath, "Not today. Not my mother." As he straightened his back, the quiet soldier inside him gave way to a sun filled with fire. He pushed the door open slowly, the creak of the hinges echoing through the room. Both Ya and Cato turned their heads in shock. The silence that followed was thick, heavy, and dangerous. For the first time in months, Tund's eyes met his mother's. Her face lit with both relief and tears, but before she could speak, Tund's gaze locked on Cato. His jaw tightened, and his voice, calm but cold, broke the silence. "Step away from my mother." That single moment changed everything. The gift of peace he had carried home was replaced with the weight of confrontation. And though his heart ached for the reunion he had dreamed of, Tund knew this was the homecoming fate had prepared for him. Inside the house, Ya's voice shook as she tried to stand her ground. She had hired Bako to fix broken doors, leaking taps, and cracks in the wall, but instead of showing gratitude for the work and the money she gave him, he had started treating her with little respect. That evening his words were sharp, his tone heavy with arrogance. He stood tall in the living room, arms crossed, speaking to her as if she were less than him. "You should be grateful I even come here," Bako said, his eyes cold. "Do you think anyone else will work in this old house for the small money you give?" Ya's face burned with humiliation. She was a kind woman who had always treated workers with fairness and respect. She had never spoken harshly to him, never withheld payment, never demanded more than she could afford. Yet here he was, shouting in her home, making her feel small. "I pay you what we agreed," she answered, her voice firm though her hands trembled slightly. "If you don't want the work, you are free to leave." But instead of leaving, Bako stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. His voice grew louder. "Do not talk to me like that, old woman. You think because your son is a soldier you can speak with pride? He is not here now. You are alone." The words cut deep. Ya's heart pounded painfully in her chest. She had not told Bako much about Tund, only that her son was serving in the military. To hear his name used as a weapon made her chest tighten with anger and fear. Outside the doorway, Tund stood still, his breath quick and shallow. He had returned home with gifts in his hands, ready to surprise his mother with laughter and joy. Instead, he was greeted with the sound of insult and cruelty. His ears burned as he heard every word. Tund's heart pounded with rage. He had faced battles, heard the sound of gunfire, and endured long nights away from home. But nothing cut him like hearing someone disrespect his mother, the woman who had raised him alone, sacrificed everything so he could become who he was. Inside, Ya tried to walk away from Bako, moving toward the chair in the corner of the room. But Bako stepped in her way, blocking her path. His tone grew darker, his pride making him careless. "You think you are better than me," he hissed. "Always giving me orders. I'm tired of it. You will learn respect today." Ya froze. She had never seen such cruelty in his eyes before. Her hands gripped the edge of her wrapper, trying to steady herself. Fear rose in her throat, but she refused to show it. She stood tall, meeting his gaze with quiet strength. Tund clenched his fists where he stood hidden. Every muscle in his body screamed to enter, but his training told him to wait, to watch, to understand fully before acting. His mother's dignity, however, was worth more than patience. Then Bako raised his hand as though to shove her aside. Ya gasped and took a step back. That was the moment Tund could no longer hold himself back. He dropped the gifts he had carried, and with a soldier's quick steps, he entered the room. His heavy boots echoed on the tiled floor, his presence commanding the space instantly. Both Ya and Bako turned, their eyes wide. "Mama," Tund said softly, his voice filled with concern. "Are you all right?" Ya's eyes filled with tears of relief. She had not expected her son to arrive at that moment. She nodded quickly, her voice trembling. "I'm fine, my son. But—" Before she could finish, Tund's eyes fixed on Bako. The soldier's calm face turned to steel, his eyes narrowing with fury. He stepped closer, his broad frame towering over the handyman. "And you," Tund said in a low, steady voice that carried the weight of command. "What do you think you are doing in my mother's house?" Bako's confidence faltered instantly. He had not expected anyone to interrupt, let alone the son he had mocked. His arrogant smile faded, and for the first time he looked uncertain. I was only talking," Bako stammered, his earlier boldness vanishing. "She misunderstood me." "Talking?" Tund repeated, his voice cold. "I stood outside and listened. You were not talking, you were disrespecting her. You raised your hand against her." The room fell silent except for Ya's shaky breaths. She sat down slowly, her hands pressed together as if in prayer. Her son's presence filled her with safety but also sorrow. She never wanted him to see her treated like that. Bako stepped back, his eyes darting toward the door as though considering escape. But Tund moved quickly, blocking his path with a sharp step forward. "You will not leave until I decide," Tund said firmly. "You thought my mother was alone. You thought no one would stand for her. But you were wrong. She is never alone." Ya's heart swelled with pride and pain at the same time. Her son's voice was strong, his words sharp, but she could feel the years of training and sacrifice behind them. Bako swallowed hard. His arrogance was gone, replaced by fear. The strength he had used against an elderly woman was useless against a soldier who had seen real battles. For the first time that day, Ya leaned back in her chair and breathed deeply. She looked at Tund, her son who had returned at the exact moment she needed him most. Her heart whispered a silent prayer of thanks. And in that quiet room, Tund made a silent promise. No one would ever hurt or disrespect his mother again. As Tund stepped further into the room, his eyes widened in shock. He had thought he arrived just in time to stop the shouting, but what he now saw made his blood boil. Bako's rough hand was gripping Ya's arm tightly, his knuckles pale from the force. Ya winced, her body tense with pain and fear, though she tried to hide it. Her face was turned away, but her eyes showed silent strength, as if refusing to give Bako the satisfaction of her weakness. Tund froze for a brief moment, his heart pounding. It was like the world had slowed, every sound sharper, every breath heavier. His mind, trained by the military to react quickly in danger, now wrestled with the deep pain of seeing his own mother treated this way. He could not believe it. The same Bako who had once smiled politely, the handyman who had been trusted in their home, was now showing his true self, a man filled with anger and arrogance. "Let her go," Tun said, his voice deep and steady. Bako's head turned sharply at the sound. His eyes narrowed, but his grip on Yas's arm did not loosen. For a moment, the handyman looked confused, as if torn between pride and fear. He had not expected Tun to return. The soldier's tall frame filled the doorway, his eyes sharp with fury, his presence unshakable. "This is between me and her," Bako muttered, trying to sound strong. "Stay out of it." Tun stepped forward, his boots striking the floor with weight and authority. He was no longer the boy who had left home months ago. He was a soldier, hardened by service, trained to protect and sharpened by discipline. But in this moment, his training merged with something greater: his love for his mother. "There is nothing between you and her," Tun replied firmly. His voice carried not just anger but command. "She is my mother. You are only a worker. Release her arm now." Yas's eyes filled with tears. She had endured the pain quietly, but hearing her son's words gave her strength. She tried to pull her arm away, but Bako's pride refused to let go. He tightened his grip for one last act of defiance, his voice rising. "You soldiers think you are powerful," Bako spat. "But here in this house I do not fear you." The words had barely left his mouth when Tund moved. His training did not allow him to waste time with arguments. In one swift motion he reached forward and gripped Bako's wrist, forcing his hand open. The strength in Tund's grasp made Bako wince and finally release Yas's arm. Yas staggered back quickly, clutching her arm to her chest, her breath shaking. Tund placed himself firmly between his mother and the handyman, his stance wide, his eyes locked on Bako. The room seemed smaller now, the air thick with tension. "You are lucky I am my mother's son," Tund said, his voice low and filled with warning. "If this were the battlefield, your actions would already have their punishment. But in this home, you will answer to her first." Bako's arrogance began to fade. He could see the fire in Tund's eyes, the steel of a man who had faced real danger, far greater than anything Bako had ever known. Yet pride still clung to him like a shadow. "She treats me like I am nothing," Bako muttered, though his voice trembled now. "Always telling me what to do, always looking down on me." Tund stepped closer, his height towering over the handyman. "She is a mother," he said firmly. "You were brought here to work, not to rule. She gave you trust and you used it to shame her. That ends today." Yas, still shaken, finally found her voice. She rose slowly from the chair, her voice calm but steady despite the pain in her arm. "Bako, I welcomed you into this home. I paid you fairly, I treated you with kindness. But you have chosen pride over respect. Today you have shown who you truly are." Her words carried weight, and for the first time Bako lowered his gaze. The shame began to creep into his eyes, though his pride tried to hide it. Tund watched him carefully, his fist still clenched at his side. He could see the struggle in Bako, the fear of a soldier before him, and the stubbornness of a man who did not want to admit defeat. Silence stretched in the room, broken only by Yas's unsteady breaths. The gifts Tund had dropped earlier lay forgotten on the floor, a reminder of how quickly joy had turned into anger. Finally Tund spoke again, his voice strong but calm. "You will leave this house now. You will never return. If you ever try to step through this gate again, you will answer not only to me but to the law." Bako's lips pressed into a thin line. He glanced once at Ya, then at Tund, and for the first time he seemed smaller, weaker. Slowly he nodded, though his eyes still flickered with bitterness. Without another word, he turned toward the door, his footsteps heavy and uneven. Tund did not move until the door closed behind him. Only then did he let out a long breath, his shoulders lowering slightly. He turned to his mother, his eyes softening with concern. "Mama," he said gently, "are you hurt?" Ya shook her head, though her arm still ached. "No, my son. Not hurt. Only shaken." Her voice wavered, but her eyes glowed with pride. "You came at the right time. God brought you home when I needed you most." Tund knelt before her, taking her hands in his. His strong fingers held her gently, as if protecting something fragile. "I will never let anyone harm you," he whispered. "Never. You have carried me all my life. Now it is my turn to carry you." Tears finally spilled down Yas's cheeks. She stroked her son's head, whispering blessings under her breath. The anger and fear of the moment slowly faded, replaced by the warmth of their bond. Outside, the night settled over the village, the air filled with the quiet hum of crickets. But inside the small house, there was only the sound of a mother and son holding each other, grateful for safety, for love, and for the strength to face what came next. For Tund, the battle was not with weapons or soldiers, it was in his own home, protecting the woman who had given him everything. And in that battle he knew he would always fight with all his heart. Tund's presence startled Bako so much that for a moment, the handyman's face turned pale. The tall soldier stood firm, his eyes sharp like blades, his voice steady and commanding. "Explain yourself," Tund demanded. His words cut through the room like thunder. Bako's lips trembled. He tried to speak, but his words stumbled out in broken pieces. I was only, she doesn't respect me," he muttered. His excuse sounded weak even to his own ears. His hands shook as he tried to hide the fear rising inside him. He had not expected Tund to return, and now the truth of his actions was exposed before the very person he feared most. Ya sat down slowly, her face pale and her arms sore from the rough grip. Tears filled her eyes, not only from pain but also from the relief of having her son beside her. She looked at Tund with trembling lips and whispered, "My son, he has not been the man we thought he was." Her words carried the weight of many weeks of silence. Tund turned to her, his eyes softening for a moment. "Mama, tell me everything." With her voice breaking, Ya began to explain. She told him how Bako had changed over time. At first he was polite, respectful and seemed grateful for the work. But soon his tone had grown sharper, his arrogance heavier. He stopped asking for things politely and began demanding them. He mocked her age, ignored her requests and walked through the house as if he owned it. Tund clenched his fists, his jaw tightening with each word. Ya went on, her tears flowing freely now. "I kept quiet for your sake, Tund. I thought maybe he was just tired or stressed. But it grew worse. He shouted when I asked him to fix things. He insulted me when I reminded him of his work. And today he threatened me." The soldier's heart pounded in his chest. To hear his mother speak of such cruelty was like being struck with a blade. He turned his gaze back to Bako, who was now shifting nervously, his eyes darting around the room as if looking for a way out. "Is this true?" Tund asked, his voice low and dangerous. Bako swallowed hard. "She exaggerates," he said weakly, but the fear in his eyes betrayed him. "I only raised my voice. I did not mean harm." "Lies!" Ya cried out, her voice echoing in the room. Her hands trembled as she pointed at him. "You held me like a prisoner in my own home. You spoke to me with no respect. You dared to threaten me." The weight of her words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Tund stepped closer to Bako, his shadow falling over the smaller man. The soldier's voice rose with controlled anger. "You dishonor my mother in her own home. You insult her, you raise your hand against her, and you dare to stand here with excuses?" Bako stammered again, his pride shrinking under Tund's piercing gaze. I was angry. I lost control." "There is no excuse," Tund said firmly. "You showed your true self. A man's character is revealed in how he treats those weaker than him. And you chose to treat my mother with cruelty." The silence that followed was suffocating. Ya's tears fell freely now, her heart breaking not only from the pain but from the betrayal. She had trusted this man in her home, given him food, paid him fairly, and treated him with kindness. To see him turn against her was a wound deeper than any physical hurt. Tund took a deep breath, his chest rising and falling heavily. He looked at his mother again, her fragile frame shaking with emotion. In that moment his resolve hardened. "Mama, you will never suffer like this again," he said softly. "As long as I breathe I will protect you." Ya nodded, wiping her tears, her voice trembling. "You are my strength, Tund. Today you saved me." Bako lowered his head, shame finally breaking through his pride. His words came out in a whisper. I am sorry." But Tund did not accept it so easily. He took a step closer, his voice sharp. "Sorry does not heal the pain you caused. Sorry does not erase the disrespect. You will leave this place, Bako. You will never come near my mother again." Bako opened his mouth to protest, but the look in Tund's eyes silenced him. It was the look of a soldier who had faced death, the look of a man who would not hesitate to act. Slowly Bako nodded, his shoulders slumping. Ya leaned back in her chair, her tears slowing as she watched her son stand strong. The fear that had gripped her heart all evening began to fade, replaced by relief. For the first time in many weeks she felt safe again. Tund picked up the small gifts he had brought home earlier. He placed them gently on the table, his hands still trembling with anger and sorrow. The day that was supposed to bring joy had turned into a night of tears, but in that moment, mother and son drew closer than ever before. Ya reached out her hand and Tund held it firmly. "You are home now," she whispered. "That is enough for me. Outside, the moon rose higher, casting its light through the windows. Inside, the small house was quiet again. The storm of voices, the clash of anger and fear had passed. But the scars of betrayal remained. Tund knew that trust, once broken, was not easily repaired. His mother had been hurt deeply, and he carried that wound in his own heart. But he also knew that they would move forward together, stronger than before. As he looked at Bako one last time, standing small and broken at the door, Tund spoke his final words. Leave. And remember this night. Remember that respect is earned, and cruelty destroys everything. Do not forget. With his head bowed, Bako left quietly, the sound of his footsteps fading into the night. The air in the house grew lighter, though the memory of what had happened would never be forgotten. Tund turned back to his mother, kneeling at her side. He wiped her tears gently and whispered, "It is over now, Mama. You are safe. I promise." And in that quiet, with only the sound of their breaths and the soft glow of the moon, Ya felt peace return to her heart. Her son had come home, not just as a soldier but as her protector, her shield, and her pride. Bako was sent away that night. His footsteps faded into the darkness, and the small gate of Ya's home closed behind him for the last time. He did not look back, for he knew the soldier's warning was not one to be taken lightly. The town would soon hear of what had happened, but in that moment, the only thing that mattered was the peace that returned to the house. Tund stood by the doorway for a while, watching the moonlight spread across the compound. His heart was heavy, but there was also relief. He turned back to his mother, who sat quietly in her chair, her hands folded, her eyes still wet with tears. He walked over and knelt in front of her, gently holding her trembling hands. "Mama," he said softly, his voice carrying both sorrow and strength, "you will never face such fear again. As long as I live, I will protect you." Ya looked into her son's eyes. She saw the same little boy she had once carried on her back, the boy who had run barefoot through the fields, the boy who had grown into a soldier. Now he was her shield. Her lips quivered as she whispered, "My son, you came home at the right time. If you had delayed even one more day, I fear what might have happened." Her words pierced Tund's heart. He tightened his grip on her hands and lowered his head. "I regret not being here sooner," he said. "You should never have suffered in silence." But Ya shook her head. "Do not blame yourself, my child. Life tests us in ways we cannot always prepare for. What matters is that you are here now." The room fell quiet. Outside, the crickets sang, and the night wind carried the faint scent of wood smoke from neighboring homes. For the first time in weeks, Ya felt safe in her own house. She leaned against her chair, breathing deeply, as if the air itself was lighter now that Bako was gone. Word of the event spread quickly through the town. Neighbors whispered about the soldier who had returned just in time to defend his mother. Some shook their heads in disbelief, while others spoke of Tund's courage with admiration. By morning, the story had traveled from one end of the market to the other. People said the timing was divine, that Tund's return was a blessing not only to his mother but to the entire community. In the days that followed, many came to visit Ya. They brought her food, fruits, and kind words. They praised her strength and reminded her she was not alone. "You raised a son who became a warrior not just for the land, but for his own blood," one elder told her. "That is the greatest blessing." Tund, however, did not bask in the praise. For him, it was not about being a hero. He did not see himself as the savior people painted him to be. To him, it was simple. A mother's safety was worth more than anything in the world. He would have done the same 1,000 times over without question. At night, when the house was quiet, Ya would sometimes sit by the window, staring at the stars. She thought of how close she had come to harm, and how her son had walked in at the very moment she needed him most. Gratitude filled her heart, not only for Tund's strength but also for the unseen hand of fate that had brought him home early. Tund noticed the way his mother's shoulders relaxed more each day. He cooked for her when she was tired, swept the yard, and repaired the small things that had been left undone. In those simple acts, Ya saw the boy she had raised, and her heart swelled with love. One evening, as they shared a meal together, Ya placed her hand on Tund's arm. "You have given me peace, my son. That is more precious than gold." Tund smiled gently. "And you have given me life, Mama. All that I am began with you. Protecting you is not a duty, it is my honor." Her eyes shone with tears, but this time they were tears of joy. As days turned into weeks, the memory of Bako's betrayal grew distant, but the lesson it carried remained clear. Trust must be guarded, and respect must never be taken for granted. Ya knew that not everyone who entered her home came with good intentions, but she also knew she was no longer alone in facing such challenges. The townspeople often repeated the story to their children: how a soldier returned just in time, how he defended his mother, and how love between a parent and child can overcome even the darkest of threats. It became a tale of warning but also of hope. In her heart, Ya carried no bitterness. She chose instead to focus on the love that surrounded her, on the strength of her son, and on the peace that had returned to her life. She prayed each night, thanking God for protecting her and for giving her a son like Tund. The soldier too found a new purpose. Beyond his duties in the army, he realized that his greatest mission was right at home. No medal, no rank, no honor in battle could compare to the duty of guarding his mother's smile. And so, the story of that night lived on, not as a tale of violence but as a reminder of loyalty, family, and the bond between a mother and her son. For Ya, the fear was gone. For Tund, the promise was clear. And for the town, the lesson was remembered. Respect and love are the true foundations of a safe home. The house that once carried the weight of anger now held peace. The air was filled not with fear but with laughter once more. And every evening as the sun set and painted the sky with gold, Ya and Tund sat together, thankful for the gift of being family. The town continued to whisper about that night, but in Tund's heart, only silence remained. Silence filled with love, silence filled with peace, silence that spoke louder than words. The end.